I'm using this term procedural films to describe algorithmic generative works, which are explicitly filmic, right, and employ moving image. So I come from experimental film background, and I used to research experimental filmmakers, and in particular structural film. The structural film was a certain interesting point in time where people like Michael Snow, Hollis Frampton, Peter Gidal, artists from the States and from the UK, used this kind of experimentation with the filmic apparatus to produce some materialist effects. And especially if we remember the work of Michael Snow, he had this beautiful film called La Région Centrale, which is essentially, I don't know if you guys know it, it's made by an automatic arm which moved the camera. Was basically placed in the middle of nowhere in Canada, and it's a beautiful film. It's 3 hours of just camera moving around and filming this absolutely people-less landscape. It's amazing. I mean, if you stay there for 3 hours, you will definitely understand this kind of feeling of machinic autonomy that also at this point when I was researching this filmmaker and others, I became really fascinated with. So I had this general interest in film and in autonomy of technology, and they came together to this idea of autonomous film, right, which is self-generative and produces certain effects. And when I later saw works of Ian Chang, I also realized that such works exist, but they're rarely discussed in terms of filmic effects, right? And they fall into the usual traps of seeing artificial intelligence as something anthropomorphic, and then it's not really about the process of watching the film. So that became my PhD project and kind of long-term research project. And I also obviously started making them in order to figure out how we as humans are interacting with images which have more agency than usual, let's put it like that. So maybe a good point to make in terms of why exactly procedural, to say, I first call them generative. But generative art has a particular history, kind of following works that appeared in the late 60s and then in algorithmic sense in the late 80s. Because generative works, and especially algorithmic generative works, still had this very strong connotation that it is about the autonomy of algorithm in a very traditional sense, meaning that it deals with the questions of is it still authentic? Is it still the author? The author? The artist is still the author, or is it the computer? What is creativity? So, and for me, it's more interesting exactly to look at these political aesthetics and the political effects of the ongoing automation of culture, of algorithmic decision-making, debates around algorithmic governance. So I borrowed this term procedural from game design. And in game design, procedural generation of content refers to automatic creation of landscapes, of levels. So procedural is something that can be also seen as an act of control. And then you have to define agency, your agency, right, your human agency or the computer's agency as a part of this assemblage. So it's within these structures of, or within these acts of control. So, and if we think about the pandemic's effect on my idea, it's actually, for me, it was weirdly relevant to experience the pandemic, because the kind of procedural films I make, they're a kind of slow cinema. They're very meditative. I'm gonna share my screen so you can see better what I mean. So this weird thing is called chronic film. It's one thing I thought during these last months of lockdown is that people who, you know, when we see other people as source of potential danger, we have to find solace in networks and digital cultural products of various kinds. So, and given that these films that I make, they are like a meditative practice, they have a capacity, or at least I hope they have a capacity to make you face the time of passing that passes when you watch something, or face yourself somehow. So chronic film is basically started as a kind of monumental joke. I was trying to see if there was an algorithmic generative film that could just make all possible images, generate all possible images. It's a remake of a mechanical automaton made in colonial times in the late 18th century for Sultan of Mysore, of Indian province. The Sultan was called Tipu. And so this was originally a kind of an automaton of a tiger eating a British soldier, which makes it a great colonial artifact, which was during the conquest by the East Indian Company. Tipu's tiger basically traveled from its original point of existence into the offices. It became a symbol of this conquest, became a symbol of the power and an exotic fetish, so to say, because it was for a long time, it was exhibited in this Indian museum, and later, so now you can actually see it in V&A collection. You can see it's a musical instrument as well, so you can open it and you can play it, and I don't know if you can see my mouse, but there's a kind of a handle that you have to operate in order for it to work. So we remade it with my collaborator, and it became a kind of inverted musical instrument. Now the tiger walks among this virtual forest, virtual trees, and the sounds are randomized based on the proximity to these trees. So it becomes again this remediated automaton, but now it doesn't have, now it's a question if it's if it becomes free somehow in the virtual space, or if it only can be reused and reused and remanipulated and remediated again and again. So yeah, and that's the current work, I would say. I'll stop here.
Yeah,